We've heard about AI, we've heard about synthetic biology, we've heard about robots. It's a fantastic time to be alive. So let's pivot, and why don't you explain to me why you think nature should be the starting point for our roadmap for addressing climate change?
Great question, and so interesting to follow up our last conversation with this topic. But I'd say, we're in a really interesting moment where the challenges that we face are predominantly related to the fact that we've been completely divorced of and separated and disconnected from nature. And we're in a moment where there are no silver bullet solutions here. There is not one single technology that's going to solve all of this. We're in a moment where climate change, biodiversity loss, how to sustain human life requires reconnection to nature and an understanding of the complex systems that create life on our planet. I mean, think about it. We are not separate from nature. We are nature. We breathe clean air. We drink clean water. We have access to healthy food because of nature. So this is a moment, and not only that, a theme that keeps coming up this year is mental health. People are unhappy. They feel separated. They feel alone. They're lacking community, and they're lacking connection to nature. So it's time for us to, as exciting as it can be, and it should be, to think about all the incredible new technologies that can be invented. And some of that is absolutely necessary in this moment. If we do that without putting nature, protecting, connecting, and restoring it, changing our energy and our food systems in a way that honors Earth first, we are not going to have a future that we want. Think about it. Do you want a future that is all robots and, carbon capture happening, and meanwhile we've raised all the trees, there's no biodiversity left, all the things that make life on this planet special and inspiring and invigorating gone? We don't want that. So there is a future that is yet to be written that is a combination potentially of both honoring cultural diversity and biodiversity and embracing the right technologies at the right moment and the right scale.
So in order to do that, it seems like one would have to have some kind of framework to sort of structure that investment and that strategy. Do you have one of those?
Yeah, and I'm going to flip through a couple of these slides first. So at One Earth, we've had an existential question that we've been seeking to answer since early days, even before we were our own nonprofit. The question was, can we actually solve the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss? Can we do that? And so this started the One Earth project, which was initially a research project, but always a research project that was intended to enable, facilitate, and facilitate action at the scale that we need, the scale and the speed that we need. So we embarked on a crazy quest to get an answer. We worked with over 50 leading scientists and experts, and in particular to University of Technology Sydney and German Aerospace, and we ended up producing a climate model. Really crazy to think that we went down the rabbit hole of spearheading a climate model, but when we looked under the hood and called all the leading academic institutions and scientists and climate scientists, et cetera, it turned out that a climate model had not been done that proved that it was possible to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees C and to do that with existing solutions. And why existing solutions? Because that was the lens through which we could include nature in the equation. So the first product of that was the One Earth climate model. You can see it up on the screen. The short answer to the question, can we solve the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss, is yes, we actually can. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it is still possible for us to do it, and we can do it with existing solutions. So this was published by Springer Nature originally in 2019. Updated versions have come out since then. In fact, more recently, just a couple of years ago, the financial sector ended up funding the updated version of this because they were really intrigued in what the science was proving and showing that it could do. Where should I go with this? Let's see.
They funded it presumably because they understood that there was huge financial consequences to how this model was being built.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this climate model was ahead of its time, and I think it took a little bit of time for it to kind of make the rounds and for people to understand what it was saying. And we certainly went deep in unpacking this 500-page book and understanding what it had to tell us. And top line, what it had to tell us was that there are 3 core solutions pathways to solving the climate crisis. First, we have to transition to 100% clean, renewable energy, which is obvious to everybody in this room. The second piece is that we need to protect, connect, and restore 50% of the world's lands and oceans, not just 30. 30 is a really critical stepping stone. The ultimate goal is 50, and that is a global goal. It's different in every region and every country, and every state has a different roadmap of nature that needs to be protected and restored. And then the third pillar is shifting our food and our fiber systems to regenerative agriculture. And that gave birth, over a couple of years of analysis and working again with our networks of scientists and experts, to the One Earth Climate Solutions Framework. And don't worry, you can access this all on our website. It's, you know, we very much believe in getting this knowledge and making it accessible to everybody. But essentially what you're seeing on this slide is those 3 core solutions pillars. And then each of them breaks down the specific solutions that reside within renewable energy, within nature conservation, and within regenerative agriculture. I call it the what. You know, this is what we need to invest in, what we need to support and scale. And this is, you know, this is prioritized by a global climate model. So there is some very deep, credible science to back this up. At the bottom, we ended up adding intersectional themes and levers of change, which ended up being a really interesting addition to this solutions framework. I call it the how. You know, how are we going to get there? You know, people who are incredibly smart and experienced, but are so focused on one particular area of work or one solution set, start to forget about the many different levers of change that we have. You know, of course, we are not going to simply drive global transformation through an international policy framework. That is one mechanism for driving change. There are all these other things that need to be deployed at the same time: climate finance, philanthropy, community action, legal empowerment, education and awareness. So this really kind of represents, in an architectural framework, a solution set that is backed by science, accessible, and also represents the complexity and the diversity of solutions and methodologies that we need to deploy right now.
So this is it's amazing work. It's voluminous. There are, I mean, you can see how many different rabbit holes there are to fall down there. But what are the examples of it actually being put into action? In investments being made, policies being changed? Do you have anything you can share?
Sure. You know, I'd say it's early days. Like, we had no idea when we started this what a sweater we were unraveling. And we've spent the last couple of years not only doing the hard work of assessing and building the science, and then breaking it down into educational, accessible, you know, material for everybody, but also talking to people, presenting it, sharing it, getting feedback. And I'm pretty blown away by the lack of knowledge about what this moment is going to require. There's
Among who?
everybody. Whether it's investors, philanthropists, activists, you know, everyday citizens, decision makers, government leaders. Climate change is complicated, and because we are so deeply divorced and disconnected from nature, and you know, there are people that really genuinely don't understand where their food comes from. Like, so we're so far apart from a baseline understanding of this earth and how it supports life, that we're in a moment where this is an opportunity to kind of re-educate ourselves about what this moment requires of us. But not to say that we haven't figured out, we're not developing ways in which to deploy this and move it into action. I'll speak about kind of the finance piece of it in a little bit. we're very committed to making this accessible to everybody. So we create really generous, robust content that defines all these different solution sets in video content and also in written form. We are partnering with different types of partners who want to apply this framework. So we have initial conversations with investors who are like, how can we adopt this framework into our investment strategy? So these are early conversations. Same thing with philanthropists. They want to know, okay, how could I use this strategy to influence my philanthropy to make it more strategic? How can I deploy dollars and capital more strategically? More recently, we actually partnered with a fellowship program who wanted us to assess fellows that were applying for, and these were new startups, leaders of new startups. They wanted us to help them assess their kind of group of fellows that had applied according to our solutions framework. And you know what was the leading kind of takeaway of that effort?
Do tell.
How many brilliant, amazing, incredibly talented people were starting companies and technologies that aren't really what our planet needs right now.
Really? Mm-hmm. That are the opposite of what the planet needs right now.
Yeah. And I think that's because we've just kind of embraced, there are so many people that are well-intentioned in this moment. They want to be part of driving change. They want to apply solutions. They want to give of their time and their talent to be part of this. Climate tech is the buzzword. We're all going to jump in and make tons of money and save the planet at the same time. Or, I legitimately want to apply my talents to this. But it requires us taking a moment to step back and understand what the planet needs, how we can facilitate regeneration and healing of our climate. And that needs to be strategically thought through. Like, we have a very limited window.
Do you want to?
There is not much time.
Can I get you to throw any particular businesses under the bus?
No, I'm not. These are all new startups. And interestingly, we had a chance to do an educational seminar with them. And they were pretty blown away. And I think empowering folks like that who are excited about putting their time and talent and energy into climate, educating them so that they can put their energies towards a strategic solution set that is really needed and necessary, is a huge opportunity ahead. So it's really early days for us in kind of figuring out how we're going to apply this.
Yeah, it's actually something Worth has been covering a lot. It's like the inefficiencies in philanthropy. The same thing happens with startups, in that they're just because it may not be a good idea, it may not be the most efficient use of money. And I think the same thing happens in the climate tech space, where it may seem like a good idea, but if you think through all the consequences, there are better ways to solve the problem.
Oh, and that's a good point too. A lot of the fellows that we ended up assessing, they were coming up with really interesting, seemingly sexy climate tech solutions or technologies, and not thinking through the repercussions of that technology. What would the impact be on the ocean, where they were deploying the technology? What was the long tail impact of it? We cannot continue to kind of operate through this singular, humans know best, we're the brightest and the smartest, and technology is going to get us out of this problem. We really have to think much more holistically, long term, and we've got to put our egos in check.
Yeah, and I think this framework is exactly that, where you're trying to, I haven't used the phrase all day, boil the ocean and try and summarize it all on one slide, but I mean, it comes very close, and it's certainly well thought through. Do you want to talk a little bit about, is it One Science, or? Yes.
Let's do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
So maybe a next thing to share is something called the Global Safety Net. So another large-scale piece of scientific research that we spearheaded, again, in partnership with networks of scientists and academic institutions and on-the-ground experts, was an effort to map not only how much land we need to protect, restore, and connect, but where. And so the initial mapping effort, which is an amalgamation of several central critical pieces, layers of information, and mapping around the world. Initially, that paper came out in 2020, And that's the paper that identified that we needed to protect 50% by 2050. And that 30% was a really critical stepping stone to reaching 50. We ended up partnering with Google Earth Engine and making that science geospatial and accessible to everybody. So you can go on globalsafetynet.app and view not only access the science, but also view the viewer, which allows you to go around the world and see the roadmap of nature on land that needs to be protected and restored. And that science has had a really profound effect on international policy, goals around conservation. We have users from 195 different countries using this as a roadmap for how they're going to implement the 30 by 30 goals that Julie mentioned earlier today. And we have bigger plans about what we'd like how we'd like to scale this platform and this science in the next couple of years.
Can you share some examples of places in the world that people may not think about needing to be protected, and that could very easily be lost if they aren't protected, that this map is sort of uncovered and revealed?
Yeah, and actually in May, we'll be launching an upgrade to the app that is inclusive of a new piece of science that's coming out called Conservation Imperatives. It's peer-reviewed science that will be published, hopefully, we think, in May. And that is identifying the last remaining refuges of nature on land that house really deep biodiversity, endemic species, and carbon stores. Because many of these natural areas with incredible biodiversity around the world are also very deep carbon stores. And we literally cannot afford to lose them. Both for losing we don't want to risk losing the biodiversity, and we don't want to risk losing those essential carbon stores. And they don't only just do that. These are also, the refuges of nature that are also producing clean air, producing clean water, making for a stable climate. They are really a central part of the equation.
And again, I think that the beautiful thing about it is the global solution, where we tend to think about, we're very U.S. centric, and we don't think about the fact that all these natural preserves or all these natural resources across the globe are really benefiting all of us. Yeah. And the problem with resource extraction is that they're just not, the nature is not priced properly. And this doesn't put a price on it per se, but at least shows where the value is. And eventually we could put a price on it.
Yep.
So, this is obviously a room full of people who are involved and care about these issues. Is there anything they can do to participate, other than read the material and sort of educate themselves about the nature of these relationships? What's the ask? How can they participate?
Well, maybe, I know we're limited on time, but...
we're going to go into Q&A right after that, so we have plenty of time.
One thing to just hold up for this crowd, we have a project underway right now with Vibrant Data Labs. Eric Berlow is here with us today in the audience. He is a data scientist who's using machine learning to really assess where resources are flowing and where they're not flowing, and created something called the Climate Finance Tracker. We are partnering with him and overlapping the Climate Solutions Framework that One Earth has created, combining it with Eric's approach to assessing data and resource flow. So what you're seeing up on the screen is the very initial findings that he has illuminated for us. And this shows you, according to the 3 pillars of One Earth, and we have much more detailed, data and information in the works. But very top line, this shows you how much money is going into the energy transition, which is great, that we need that. But it's also showing you just how little capital is flowing into nature conservation and regenerative agriculture. I mean, it is astounding when you look at that. I mean, look at the green. Like, that is Earth. That is the very thing that sustains life that we are raising down on the regular. And it is getting absolutely no resources for protection, for restoration, for creating connectivity. It is astounding, actually. And so we hope that these kind of projects that we're taking on help to illuminate where resource flow needs to be heading, how to prioritize climate finance, philanthropy. It could really change the game and also elevate, how little resources equitable solutions are also getting.
Got it. So I want to open it up to the audience. So we're going to go from a Q&A from your session to the overall town hall, probably pretty seamlessly, but let's start with some questions for Justin. right here up front.
My first exposure to the kind of things you're doing was through Paul Hawkins' Drawdown Project. And I would imagine that a lot of that fed into your model and what you've been talking about here. Would you talk a little bit about that connection?
Sure. Paul was one of the people in my life that inspired me to do this work. I met him through the Bioneers Conference, which actually just happened, but many years ago, back in 2007. And Paul's incredible understanding of the interconnectivity of life is truly inspired this work. And when I was running a foundation in my prior life before doing One Earth, we ended up funding some of the initial work for Drawdown. So there's overlap. I guess the thing that is different about, there's multiple frameworks out there right now. There's Speed and Scale, there's Drawdown. What makes One Earth's framework special is the fact that it's based on a global climate model. No other frameworks do that. And because we incorporated the role of nature in solving this conundrum, it ends up elevating equitable solutions. So it's a very unique framework and one that I think really needs much more exposure.
Various regulations, whatever. So is your model complementary to those? Or if you met a philanthropist and they said, well, I thought I was doing the right thing. I've been following these models, and now you're saying I've missed my focus. I mean, how do you handle that?
Great question, and one that we have grappled with because we didn't know what we were going to land on exactly. I guess my answer to that is, the ESG served a very important, critical, purpose, and we're one of the first attempts to really show interconnectivity between different issues. Because this is based on a global climate model and additional streams of science that have been done, it suddenly creates a lot of clarity through the lens of climate and the urgency of climate around what we need to do now and what the priorities should be. So I see it as additive. There's no reason I would never want to take down the issues.
You wouldn't want there to be like a model competition that we'd put on TV?
No.
Declare America's top model?
That would be interesting, but no.
Just an idea. Another question?
Looking at this graph, of course, that's the question, why is there such a big difference? And you would say immediately, well, on the energy side, it's pretty clear because that essentially determines the standard of living on Earth, and it is completely financially documented extremely well. I remember in the early 2000s when the whole questions on nature came up, there were sort of various efforts of, go plant trees to make up for the miles that you had been flying somewhere and so on. And they came pretty rapidly in disrepute because there was no financial model that either held water or that actually was controllable in light of other economic interests, let's say in the Amazonas, to just take N acres and bulldoze them. And so I wonder, in this very interesting perspective, if there's a way for your organization to find an economic connection, even if that connection may have a longer time frame than the rapid reduction of CO2, because biodiversity takes a longer time frame. But without that, you're in it's apples and oranges and you cannot trade them. And I think you're seeking to get the green a little up here.
Oh, yeah.
Is there any effort in that direction to create model?
It's such a great question. And there's a lot of kind of early stage conversations happening across the movement writ large, I would say, around the concept of biodiversity credits. And people are really grappling with this. What is the right way to do this? And how do you avoid some of the pitfalls of carbon credits, which in many cases were incredibly problematic, especially for local communities and indigenous communities. So I'd say it's, we are very much involved in early conversations around that and learning from others and partnering with economists, et cetera. There isn't a perfect solution yet. We're kind of keeping apprised of it, weighing in when it makes sense. But I think that, one thing to think about when you're looking at these three pillars and noticing how small nature conservation is, it also, it begs the question, you know, how can strategic deployment of different types of capital help to, you know, level this up a bit? So for example, you know, philanthropy can and already does, but needs to be radically scaled around nature conservation and regenerative agriculture. You know, less than 2% of all philanthropic capital goes to climate and environment. I mean, that is absolutely insane in this moment. Philanthropy could be playing a radical role in helping us solve this, but people really have to embrace it as a leading strategy. So, you know, it is an imperfect path forward, but I think by illuminating, you know, having illuminating science, data, knowing what the planet needs, knowing what it means in a geospatial context, like what country, what regions, we've got to be really smart in this moment. And I think that we can challenge everybody to think about how they deploy their capital and their types of capital in a different, more strategic way.
So I'm going to keep asking questions of the audience. I want to go through a couple of the questions that we got throughout the day. They're not specifically designed for you, but actually I think you have opinions about most of these. And this one's an interesting one. What policies and incentives schemes would you recommend for EU countries to implement to keep up with US regulations in concerning IRA and 450 or 45Q? It's very interesting because usually we're thinking about how we're going to keep up with Europe. But now that maybe the U.S. is moving a little faster, this is someone asking what Europe can do to keep up with the U.S.
You know, given that my background and expertise is not policy, I actually don't really feel equipped to totally answer that question. So
No worries. Is there anybody in the audience, since we're open up in the town hall, that wants to speechify?
EU deforestation regulations are actually leading the world in this regard?
Yeah. I mean, my understanding and my standard spiel is that in this case, the EU is usually ahead of the US, and California is usually ahead of the US.
Yeah.
And then as California goes, the rest of the country inevitably follows. So I don't think that even the progress that the United States has made in the last 2 years is really systematically in a lot of different areas. The EU's just been inherently more progressive in a lot of these issues.
I would agree with that, especially on deforestation, especially on pesticide use,
And we heard
chemicals. all that.
plastics and not exporting plastics. Like it's a pretty long list. But here we go. There's a question on the future of climate tech. What would you say? And again, your focus is on nature, not climate tech. But is there anything in the climate tech space, anything you heard today that you're like, that actually could have some legs and could scale and could do some good?
Well, you know, it's interesting as we kind of came out with the solutions framework, and we're challenged with questions like this, you know, and in thoughtful discussions with partners, I kept wondering how do I answer this climate technology conversation? But the truth is that all of the solutions within the solutions framework, there are infinite technology opportunities across those solutions. You know, whether it's energy efficiency or scaling geothermal, or technology has a massive role to play across many of those solution sets. And even, just to give an interesting one, you know, from a conservation lens, supporting indigenous-led, community-led conservation efforts across the board, across the world, is a critical solutions pathway. And I have seen some amazing technologies that have been developed in partnership with indigenous communities and deployed with indigenous communities for mapping their lands and supporting indigenous land tenure rights. So there's some really, and you know, if you want to check it out, Digital Democracy, they're going to have a new name soon, but they have done some phenomenal work, you know, building technology from the ground up in partnership with indigenous communities to support their indigenous land tenure efforts. And what came out of that is not only brilliant, but really astounding, because it starts to show how different things can look when they're led from a different cultural perspective.
Yeah, in the agricultural space too.
Yeah.
Just up and down,
oh,
there's
God, so
tremendous innovations. And
Yeah.
I think maybe, I don't want to critique the program, we're still in the middle of the program, but for when we do this again in New York in September, I may lean into the agricultural space a little more heavily, just because there's so much work being done there. And again, it's a huge part of the problem, and it can be part of the solution as well. More questions? Over here, yeah.
Thanks for your talk today. My name's Ihi Heke. I'm native from New Zealand. It's drawn on my face. This didn't happen when I
Not
was
of San
drunk.
Francisco.
Yeah. There was an interesting thing happened during one of the breaks. I spoke to the conference convener outside and said I was interested in the amount of AI that didn't include Indigenous knowledge, because the oldest form of knowledge that we have is their relationship with nature. And there was another chap standing next to us and said, but surely that's just anecdotal, that's not data.
Okay, who was it? Is the chap still in the room?
Well, I was invited by someone else, but if I was here and paid my own way, I would have knocked his head off for him. So, what I've noticed in your models there as well is that there is a great deal of information that sits amongst Indigenous people, and I don't think it's necessarily non-Indigenous that are the barrier to that being flowing into models like this. But have you found some opportunities that you can tell us about where those barriers can be broken down more easily? Because when I sit in the room here, I only found one person today that looked like me-ish, that had a brown face, and then I found another one, and that's a difficult place to come into. And I would have thought that your talk would have been first today.
Is the question, do you want to be first or do you want to be last? Last is pretty good. Last is pretty good. But do you want to address that?
Sure. You know, a lot of I didn't have a chance to kind of expressly share this, but we work with networks not only of scientists and experts, but also on-the-ground knowledge holders. And they have had input into all of the models that we've developed. And we have much more ahead in how we can do that. Interestingly, in the Global Safety Network, at least a third of the lands that we illuminated in the Global Safety Net are Indigenous lands. And so achieving the 50% goal for nature is literally not possible without elevating and in fact supporting 100% Indigenous land tenure, 100%. So and I think that there's so much knowledge that is needed out there in understanding that we need to revert back to very old indigenous knowledge carriers, and we need to connect. We need to build community with different races, different cultures, and we need to embrace all of these systems. It's just, it's been a process with One Earth and building this out, but ultimately what I seek to support is supporting a vision of the future that embraces not only biological diversity, but cultural diversity, and how the two are part and parcel of the same coin. And that's certainly a world that I want to fight for.
So I've got another question that was written down from the day, and I think it'd actually be a good place to end, and I think you've got a good answer for it. With all the headlines now, how can we stay inspired?
So part of the reason that we built this out is that I had the honor and the privilege of building a foundation. I ran the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation for 13 years and built it from the ground up. And we raised and deployed over $100 million to 200 projects around the world, most of them community-led, grassroots-led, indigenous-led. The privilege of being in conversation and partnership with the millions, I didn't have millions, but this vast network of change makers that are implementing the solutions that are illuminated on that climate solutions framework around the world injected me with a permanent sense of optimism about what's possible. And so a lot of the work that we do at One Earth is to hold up and elevate what we think is a central solution in this moment, and that is bottom-up, grassroots, community-led solutions. And on our website and across all of our media channels, we're in partnership with hundreds of local nonprofits, local communities, We help elevate the stories of the solutions that they're holding, the knowledge that they're holding. And we do that because everybody deserves to tap into the movement of people that are alive and well, doing the work, and they need the resources and the support to scale their work. And when you tap into that, you know what's possible. It is not game over. It is not. We just need to move quickly to support the people doing the work on the ground.
Well, I thank you for the work that you're doing. I hope that Techonomy and Worth can help play a small part in that. And I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to come here and spend a day with us and hopefully be inspired, maybe learn something. I'm going to invite Josh Campbell back on stage to do last remarks, but thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Big round of applause for Josh.